Let me ask you all a quick question before we start. Do you know what's cooler than the tragic waste of human life that is the Vietnam War? That's right, it's the Vietnam War, but with mechs. Hey Kings, it's ya boy, Teams of Regret, and today we're looking at Kriegsfront Tactics Prologue, which is the first few missions for Kriegsfront Tactics, a turn-based mecha tactics game inspired by the likes of Front Mission, XCOM, Armored Core, and so much more. Toge Productions, the devs behind this game, have kindly given me early access to the first few levels of the game, which you too should be able to download once this video goes up. The game is set in an alternate 1970s, in the midst of a vicious war in Southeast Asia. You play as John Kriegsfront, a commander in charge of a squad of Special Forces Krieg mech pilots, who have been inserted deep into the jungles of Indonesia to reclaim the colony on the behest of the United Overseas Company. Your job is to take back control of the islands, brick by brick, body by body, from the Indonesian nationalists who have risen up ever since the Yamato Empire's withdrawal from the archipelago. Now, to outsiders, the game very much has a Vietnam War-inspired atmosphere, and I'm pretty sure this is intentional on the devs' front. After all, when one thinks of a Cold War guerrilla conflict in Southeast Asia, one automatically thinks of that time a bunch of Vietnamese rice farmers kicked out the single strongest military power in the world. However, this is a bit of a false flag, you see. Kriegsfront isn't so much about the Vietnam War with mechs, as it is about the Indonesian War of Independence with mechs. You see, the UOC stands in for the Dutch and the Empire of Yamato, unsurprisingly, as Japan. I know this for certain because I am Indonesian myself, and so are the fine men and women working at Toge Productions. So you could say this game is a bit near and dear to me. At any rate, that's about as much as any non-devs really know about the game's setting. Toge Pro are keeping their cards pretty close to their chest right now. Even the press kit they gave me didn't go into much detail about the game outside of a brief overview of what the game even is and why they're making it. That's all fine though, because that means I can skip straight to talking about the game and why I'm quite excited for the full release. As you can see from the gameplay that I've been showing in the background, Kriegsfront Tactics takes a more retro approach when it comes to the game's visuals. This is a very good thing because a small team like theirs probably wouldn't be able to do photorealistic graphics all too well, given their budget. That being said, this does not mean that the devs weren't trying to make their game look good, because Kriegsfront Tactics makes the most out of its simple but stylized visual form. Toge Pro has done a really good job making their game look like it very well could have came out around the time of the PS1. As for what the art style itself is depicting in the game, I can wholeheartedly say that this is very authentic to the time and the place that the devs set the game in. The mech designs themselves are also pretty good. Well, definitely on the chunky and low poly and blockier, and they are still very well designed. All of the tech that the devs designed fits into the mid-Cold War aesthetic that it's aiming to portray, down from the mech parts all the way to the weapons that they use. The guns that the mech use specifically fit the bill, with a bunch of them being oversized versions of actual guns made during the Cold War. The care and attention given to the designs don't just end there. Rebel machines look well worn, fitting since most of them are salvage machines, while the UOC mechs are better maintained. You can easily tell that the devs put a lot of love and attention to this front. Unfortunately, owing to the fact that the Kriegsfront Prologue is really just a few missions, we don't currently know about the kind of visual variety we're getting in the final game. Right now, all we know is we're getting jungle missions, but it would be really cool to get urban missions later down the line too. Since the devs are playing their cards pretty close to their chest, it's currently uncertain whether the jungle maps are all that we can look forward to, which if it were the case, the game could potentially go dull a bit sooner than I'd like. That being said, the devs did say maps were going to be procedurally generated, so it certainly won't wear out too soon. On the audio front, there's not much to say besides that things are also pretty good. Sound effects are good and punchy. Each weapon feels and sounds right, distinct enough from each other that you can tell what's hitting you even if you don't see the weapon that's firing. Now, the music that's in the prologue has also been really good, despite there not being very much of it. The music composer has somehow found a way to mix together modern electric guitar riffs with traditional Indonesian bronze instruments. Absolutely fascinating to listen to while in the middle of a mission, and it perfectly captures that feeling of old meets new that the game is based around. Again, we only have a few tracks to go off, but if Toge Pro has more tracks waiting for us on the final release, then Kriegsfront Tactics potentially has one hell of a soundtrack waiting for us. Now on to the gameplay, and gameplay is where Kriegsfront starts to feel more like a modern game than a retro one, given that it borrows heavily from more recent turn-based tactics games like XCOM, Valkyria Chronicles, and a bunch of other games like them. You control a squad of mechs, each of which can be customized to fit your tactical needs in the battlefield. In the prologue, there doesn't appear to be any class limitations that force a mech into a certain playstyle, so in theory you could run a very wacky squad. However, the only way to get new parts in the prologue is to scavenge it from dead enemies, which is a bit difficult for reasons I'll get further into later. Because of this, I haven't been able to play around with the customization all that much. But I can confidently say that there is some crazy potential here when it comes to mech customization. Now, it's nowhere near the amount of customization in something like Armored Core or Gundam Breaker, but there is enough here that you can potentially make some very silly and very inventive builds. Now, putting your mechs into combat is where the fun starts. Combat takes heavy influence from newer XCOM games, using a square grid system and having teams attack each other in turns instead of moving each unit individually with an initiative check. Each mech has a number of action points, and different actions have different action point requirements. Moving a single tile takes 1 point, while attacking with a weapon takes more points. With the heavier the weapon, the more points it needs. Each mech can carry up to 4 pieces of equipment, that being 1 on each hand and 1 on each shoulder. Larger handheld weapons like Gatling guns and snipers or rifles will take 2 hands to operate, while shoulder-mounted weapons can't be reloaded in the field. Alternatively, equipment like shields increase the likelihood of reducing damage from a certain direction, or gives a chance for the mech to block all damage entirely. Different parts like cockpits, legs, and arms all have different stats, which alter how you're going to use a mech in combat. Movement and attacking are very closely interlinked, since attacking head-on gives the target a large chance to evade or block the attack, while attacking from angles or even from the flanks or the rear reduces that chance. Beyond that, tiles filled with trees will block line of sight, so camping one of your mechs on a forest tile functionally renders it invisible until an enemy mech decides to sit on an adjacent tile. The combat mechanics itself is actually pretty interesting. Now, much of it is rather run-of-the-mill for a turn-based tactics game, with positioning, RNG, and management of action points playing key roles in the gameplay loop. If you've played XCOM or Valkyria Chronicles or Phoenix Point, you pretty much already know the general gist of it. However, there are a few standout features that I want to focus on. For one, all attacks move as physical projectiles in the game world. The game's combat RNG isn't as simple as a hit or miss roll, but instead a roll for bullets spread in a particular cone. Most times, weapons fire in a burst of several shots, and those shots will travel in a cone until they either reach the limit of their range or hit something. Sometimes that something is the enemy you're targeting, sometimes it's the environment, sometimes it's an ally that's accidentally in the line of fire. Honestly, I love this. I think this is a much better system than just rolling to see whether something hits or misses. Another thing to consider during combat is damage falloff. Weapons like shotguns and submachine guns could technically hit targets way off in the distance, but the severe damage penalty to these hits means you're going to have to go in up close and personal to make the most out of each hit. Now, as much as I really like this form of RNG turn-based combat, I have to mention that there's a part of it that doesn't really gel all too well with me. You see, Kriegsfront Tactics has a locational damage system, not unlike Fallout, Kingdom Come Deliverance, or, the Gundam Breaker game. Each mech part, be it the cockpit, arms, or legs, has their own separate health pool. If an attack lands on said part, only said part will take damage. Whittling down an arm's health to 0 disarms that mech, rendering any weapon held by that arm useless. Destroying a mech's legs doesn't immobilize it, but it does reduce a mech's evasion stat to 0, meaning that attacks against it are practically guaranteed. On the flip side, destroying the cockpit is the fastest way to neutralize a mech since it just outright kills the mech. This has the potential to add a lot of depth to the game's combat because currently the only way to get new mech parts is to salvage it from mechs you've defeated. So if a mech has a part you want, try not to destroy it. However, from my personal experience playing the prologue, this system could do with a bit of tweaking because unless you're using the aimed shot ability, there's no way to control which part of the enemy's mech your mech is shooting. By default, your mechs, when given the order to attack, are just going to fire at the enemy's general direction, which means there's a high chance of you hitting a part that you might not want to. Moreover, not every weapon has the ability to do a manually aimed shot, especially melee weapons which appear to hit the enemy at random locations each time. While I could see the argument that this is by design and that it's actually good and adds depth to the game, I honestly believe the mechanic in its current form could use with a bunch of tweaks. Now above the tactical combat layer of the game is the strategic overworld, which plays very much like Mountain Blade, Phantom Brigade, or even like JRPGs that have an overworld mechanic. There's going to be points of interest where you can go through these mini-stories, sometimes rewarding you with supplies or other bonuses. There's also bases that you can commandeer, which is where you're going to be repairing and restocking your mechs. Some of the more powerful weapons in your arsenal don't reload in the field and functionally become deadweight after using up all their ammo. In the prologue, we're given a limited amount of repair and resupply points, so I'm not currently entirely sure if this will be the case for the full game. That's definitely something to keep an eye on because if resupply and repairs are going to be limited in the full game, that might make some things a bit tedious. At any rate, despite being a rather small world space, the parts of the game that Toge Pro gave me access to paints a very ambitious picture. We're potentially looking at a lot of hours worth of play, especially if the devs manage to nail the procedurally generated maps for random encounters. Beyond what I've mentioned here, there's a bunch of other features like pilot sanity, as well as the aforementioned repair and resupply mechanic. Now these mechanics are kind of in the prologue build, but they didn't really get to shine all that much, largely because the prologue kind of just ends before you get to see the full scope of what they're supposed to do. As for the prologue's campaign and plot, well, it's paper thin as it is. There's very little to dive into, though what little we get does a pretty good job of setting up the gist of things. The UOC, the Indonesians, the Empire, they're not exactly elaborated upon very much, though I assume the devs are getting to much greater depth with them once the full game comes out. As of right now though, I've pretty much covered everything I've been given access to, which means that about wraps it up for the Kriegsfront Tactics prologue. It's a very promising project with a lot of ambition on the devs front. If Toge Pro keeps the current trajectory, I'm rather confident that it's going to turn out very, very good. The game doesn't exactly have a fixed release date, so it remains to be seen how long we'll have to wait to see if the devs make good on their promises. At any rate, I've got other videos and reviews down the pipeline, a bunch of them in fact, though I'm not sure which one I'll end up finishing first. See, I kind of have a day job to pay the bills, and YouTube is more of a side gig, so which video I work on heavily depends on my mood and motivation. If you want to catch whatever I've got cooking, feel free to subscribe. Alternatively, feel free to follow me on Sheeter if you want to see updates on what I'm working on or you just want to see me shitposting. As always, this has been Teams of Regret, wishing you all good luck and Godspeed. Signing out.